Kia ora, I'm Tuari Dawson, and you're listening to the Invisible Sensei podcast. Bunkai is one of the most contentious issues I see within karate. Some styles have a massive, shall we say, emphasis on understanding kata and the bunkai and then analysing the movements down to the molecule. Other karate styles use kata as an exercise to practice techniques, and they have other ways of addressing self-defense, and that could be through prearranged sparring, so on and so forth. Now, I came up in a style, Okinawan Goju-ryu is practiced by my sensei and other sensei in the art that I have trained under, where bunkai was an extremely integral part of your karate practice. Now, I want to talk about bunkai today because I received a really interesting message from Hanshi Cesar Bukowski, who has actually been on the podcast, lucky enough to meet him in 2023. And I won't go into the detail of it because it was shared with me, I think, in a friend-to-friend manner. But it was a really interesting message. I guess it's a little bit of a teaser, looking at the way in which people interpret bunkai oyo, and the various kind of levels of interpretation that people have and ways of looking at it. So it really spurred me to think about this topic over the last week, and so that's what I'm going to talk about today. Bunkai to me is an incredible, it's a journey, I guess, and it goes through several stages. And for me, my introduction to bunkai was as a kid, and as part of our grading syllabus and as part of our training, we'd have to go through very standardized bunkai, take a kata, a goju-ryu kata like cipher, and we'd have to go through preset bunkai, where basically they would point at you and you would, with a training partner, demonstrate a grip break to a palm block and to a back fist. If you do goju-ryu, you can imagine what I'm talking about. If you don't do, probably you can still, if you're doing a lot of bunkai, understand kind of what I'm getting at. And I guess I never really thought about it when I was younger because I saw kata at that stage in my training as a kind of a necessary evil, I suppose. Now, in my 50s, it's a real topic of thought and conversation. And it was actually during Bukowski Sensei's interview where he alluded to the importance of bunkai, but also the way in which, and I'm paraphrasing, it can become a little bit of self-illusion and delusion. Now, again, I'm paraphrasing, which I thought was a really interesting comment and one that I completely agree with. Sometimes I think there is a trend within modern karate to make things as complex and as esoteric as possible. And there are many practitioners, I think, who have this incredible way of imparting their bunkai and their oyo. One of the sensei that jumps immediately to mind for me is Taira Masaji sensei of Okinawan Goju-ryu in Okinawa. I remember hearing about him, it must have been in the late 80s, early 90s, about this sensei, of a senior of mine in the dojo, someone senior to me, would travel to Okinawa on a fairly regular basis, and he would talk about this sensei who could attack you with a kata. And, I remember watching, early 2000s, watching I think it was a Discovery Channel documentary in which Taira Sensei was very, very evident in terms of the way that he did things, and it was very impressive. And I've had opportunity to train in Gashuku on 2 occasions with Taira Sensei, and be in Gashuku as a student with some of his senior students who are sensei. And every time it's been a really illuminating session. I've come away at a certain point, you're trying to push more in, but it just won't go in. It's really, really mind-boggling. When I trained with Taira Sensei the first time, we trained for probably about 4 or 5 hours, end of our, probably 2.5 hours in, I was going, where are we off to in terms of, it was just mind blowing, the places that he kind of took the bunkai. Also, I was trained with people that have kept bunkai very, very simple, very, very straightforward, very, very, for want of a better term, binary. You punch, I block. You punch, I block, I hit. And I find that extremely satisfying as well. I think sometimes it can kind of become this thing of being fancy for fancy's sake. Chinen Sensei, Tiro Chinen, the late great Tiro Chinen Sensei, had devised incredible Renzoku Kumite drills that incorporated a lot of bunkai, that extended upon sandangi, the 3-level block and strike training. And he was an incredible fighter. His kumite, his randori, his technique was just exemplary. And, just have a look at some of his videos online. But he was also extremely, extremely involved in the understanding of bunkai and had a very specific way of imparting that, which really made an impression on me. And then there's been other sensei and other people, another sensei that I've trained with, and I've come away gone, everyone has their own particular take. And I've kind of been thinking ever since I received that text, how do you define a bunkai and how do you define an oyo and what does it actually mean? And kata for me is it's a wellspring of technique. But I think it's really possible. I know that I've been guilty of this, where you just kind of go down a path where it's kind of like almost that my thinking was so, what's the word? I don't want to say airy-fairy, but it was so theoretical that I kind of got away from the practical elements of what I was doing. And I fell in love with the sort of way and how bright I thought I was. And I think that if you've been in any kind of real life situation, from some drunk idiot trying something at a bar or a pub to, you worked in law enforcement or whatever, you know that real violence tends to be really quick, very nasty, and doesn't go on for too long. And so I think it's really important to strike a balance. Like when I look at bunkai, and over the last couple of years, I've had a couple of online seminars, which some people who are listening to this podcast came to, and I hope they enjoyed. My last one was mid last year, and I was accompanied by by my friend James Pankovic Sensei, and we did this thing called the Bunkai Jam, which was my idea for the name, and he was kind enough to be a part of it. And what we were doing in essence was taking parts of kata, of each other's kata, and just kind of giving our impressions. So he would do something, say for instance, out of Naihanchi, and I would do something out of Geksai and sort of demonstrate the move and sort of see where he would go with it, and people were able to train with us and experiment themselves and sort of see where it went to. And for me, I suppose, that's all great and wonderful, and I really enjoy doing that sort of stuff, but I suppose what goes into your consideration when I'm thinking about bunkai, I am trying to customize, for want of a better word, the application and my response to a given stimulus, a punch, a kick, a grab, a throw, a choke, whatever it is, in a way that makes sense for my physicality. And I think that sometimes it's really a trap. And I've seen this with my own students where, because of my physical stature, I tend to be one of the bigger guys, although certainly not in every instance. And so my response to specific situations tends to lean into that. And if you're not built like me, or if I'm not built like you, your answer to the question that's posed to you by someone coming at you in a specific way may not be the right one for you. And where I might try a shot there to the chin, and then try and do a sweep and whatever it is, and try and sweep people to the ground and finish with a strike. It may be better for you to one good shot there, a front foot sweep, and then leaving the situation. I don't know. You get what I mean, though. And I think that it's really important when we're teaching Bunkai. I've met people who have this kind of mentality where they will try to pass off these Bunkai as something that was always meant to be. They will pass off Bunkai that they've created on the spot as this was taught to me, this was originally what Miyagi Sensei or Nagamine Sensei or whoever intended with this technique, and they may well be right. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying that it's actually okay if you're coming up with a Bunkai and you own that. I don't mean literally own it, but just say, look, this is what kind of occurs to me when I see this movement, when I see this technique, given the situation, given my physicality, given your physicality, this is what I've kind of come up with. The problem arises when, well, for me, and it'd be wonderful to sort of say, oh, look, that this was a technique taught as part of the Fujian temple boxing 300 years ago that went to Shanghai and then made its way to Okinawa, and this create sort of a story and a mythos behind the technique. And I think that it doesn't need to be that. Like an example of that is that, so for my students, a few years ago I created a kata called kobudo kata called Kihonbo. Not an original name, but it was probably about, I think it's got maybe 36 movements in it from woe to go. And for the first couple of years, it was kind of half done, but I taught it anyway. It started as being a combination to teach particularly my younger students how to establish a good shikodachi, a good zenkotarachi, and to try and get into suriashi, that gliding step that we have in kata. And then as time went on, I added to it, and now it's a standard part of my syllabus. But when people ask me about the kata, they have this idea that I'm going to sort of share with them this ancient lineage where this kata came from, and I'm going, look, man, I made this kata up as a step between kobudo kata, as a way of making the training more interesting for kids who really were getting kind of bored with kata, as we all want to do. And I found it to be something that the kids really enjoyed. And so that's kind of the lineage of it. Doesn't make it any less of a kata. Does it have Okinawan, Japanese or Chinese lineage? No, not particularly. It was made up by a tall, tattooed Māori guy from New Zealand. And I guess what I'm trying to say is it's all right if you're creating stuff. I think we can take responsibility for it. A lot of times I see people who come up with bunkai and have these really unique takes on their own karate and their training, and there's this fear that if they share them with other people that they're going to get stolen, that their intellectual property is going to get taken. But I think that's one of the beauties of bunkai. As you get to know it and as you become more au fait with it, it turns into oil, which for me in my small mind is kind of the analysis of the principle behind the technique. And the only way that can become effective is if we take ownership of who we are and where we're from and how we're built and, our temperament and what we're trying to ultimately achieve. Are we trying to incapacitate an opponent? Are we trying to free ourselves from a situation? It's kind of really up to the person practicing it and the kata and the way that they choose to practice it. There are plenty of people, and look, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube are filled with incredible martial artists. Incredible examples of both on Okinawa and Japan and Europe and America and North America and, the UK, incredible martial artists with um, anxiety-inducing levels of technique in the sense that they're just so, they're so incredible. There's one particular chap from the UK and whose name escapes me, but he's got, oh my God, everything he does. He kicks, he punches, he's flexible, fast. He's built like a bodybuilder. He's got incredible point technique. He's got beautiful kata, and he's got great full contact stuff. And never in my life have I been so jealous and envious. And he's way younger than me too, and way more skilled than I have ever been. Hence why I have to take myself off Instagram every now and then, or else I just sort of die of jealousy. But you get my point. There is always going to be people out there who have these incredible levels of skill. And I think what we ultimately bring to the equation is, when you hear people talk about karate, oftentimes people talk about, especially, practitioners who've been doing it, say maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to put a label on it, but so you understand my point. People have been doing it for like 10 years. They talk about karate. They talk about when we practice karate. And then there are some practitioners who've been in it forever, 50 years plus, and they talk about my karate as opposed to karate as kind of this entity. They talk about my karate, meaning the way in which they choose to articulate and communicate their art. So I think for me, envy, jealousy, and just sheer bloody mindedness aside, I think that what I'm trying to bring to my karate is a combination of all those people that I've talked about earlier that I trained with, and people that I've seen online, people that I've had opportunities to train with. I mean, like there are some people that I've met and trained with. I mean, I'll give you Canada as an example, where I was very kindly invited to go to different dojo filled with instructors, students, teachers who were so kind, so very kind, so very accommodating, but way fitter, way faster, way stronger. But, all I could do was try and share what my last 40-something years of training has been for me. And it probably wasn't something new. It probably wasn't something all that interesting, but it was me articulating it in the way that I thought might hopefully be of interest to the people that I was with. And I think when it comes to bunkai or your karate, whether it's kobudo, aiki jiu-jitsu, whatever martial art you choose to do, that's all we can do. We can articulate it in the way that makes most sense to us. And I think as long as we're doing something which is authentically ourselves and we're being authentic about it, then I don't think we can really go wrong. There's always going to be people who are going to be killers and naysayers and all that sort of stuff. And gosh, if you want to learn about naysayers and killers and all of that sort of stuff, have a podcast, because you get you get some really ugly feedback. But look, the thing is, that's kind of how it goes. You put something out into the public forum, you can't expect people to not come back at you or to not share their thoughts. Likewise, there's also some wonderful stuff. And I think for me, when people talk about my karate, they're talking about the way in which they approach the art and the way in which they choose to continue to have that longevity that makes it interesting, a spirit of inquiry and curiosity. And I think for me, that's what I'm certainly trying to do. There are plenty of reasons, and very valid reasons, why we get to a point where our body kind of doesn't do what we wanted it to do if you're getting older. And as I've always said, and you've heard me say, we train with unrealistic expectations, but also too, it's about going back to it and finding something new and interesting and practicing something, and things kind of making sense to you in a way that perhaps they haven't before. And I think for me, when it comes to Bunkai, which is the analysis of a technique, and Oyo, which is the analysis, and to my mind at least, of a principle, I think that's where the excitement happens. I think that's where the juice is. So if you're thinking about your bunkai, think about why you do what you do. Think about what you do when you do it, and think about the most healthy way to do it so that you can both challenge yourself but take care of your body. You can enrich your studies and keep up that curiosity that is so integral to our study of these arts. I'm not out to be a fighter. I'm just out to try and continue to do this thing which has made my life so very much better.